They thought they were about to humiliate a nobody in front of the city's most powerful elites. But they had no idea they were handing the spotlight to the one woman who owned the very ground they stood on. The grand ballroom of the Blackwood Foundation stretched beneath towering crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off polished marble floors that echoed softly with every measured step. A space reserved for those who measured worth in net worth and influence, where tailored tuxedos and designer gowns spoke louder than words, and where tonight's charity auction wasn't just about philanthropy. It was about power, visibility, and quiet dominance. Clara Whitmore stepped inside without announcement, her presence almost invisible against the shimmer of luxury around her, dressed in a simple ivory dress that fell just below her knees, paired with modest heels that made no effort to compete with the glittering stilettos clicking confidently across the room, her dark hair tied back neatly, her posture relaxed but steady, as if she had nothing to prove and no one to impress. A few heads turned, not out of admiration, but curiosity, the kind reserved for someone who didn't quite belong. And within seconds, the silent calculations began, eyes scanning labels, fabrics, posture, searching for signals of status, and finding none. At the far end of the room, Evelyn Blackwood stood surrounded by a circle of millionaires and socialites, her presence commanding without effort, her deep emerald gown catching the light just enough to remind everyone exactly who ruled this space. Her laughter smooth and controlled as she acknowledged donors, investors, and long-standing allies, each interaction reinforcing an invisible hierarchy that everyone understood but no one dared question. It didn't take long for her gaze to drift toward Clara, lingering just a second too long, curiosity sharpening into quiet judgment as she tilted her head slightly, as if examining an anomaly that had slipped through an otherwise flawless system. "Do we know her?" someone murmured beside her, voice low but edged with amusement. Evelyn's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, more an expression of polite dismissal. "If we did," she replied softly, "she wouldn't look like that." Across the room, Clara paused briefly near the edge of the auction display, her fingers brushing lightly against a glass case housing a vintage timepiece, her reflection faint in the polished surface, her expression unreadable, calm, almost detached, as if the whispers floating through the air weren't meant for her, or perhaps as if she had heard far worse before. A waiter passed by offering champagne, hesitating for just a fraction of a second before extending the tray towards someone behind her instead, an almost imperceptible decision that didn't go unnoticed by those watching. A few quiet chuckles followed, subtle, contained, but deliberate enough to draw a line. "This is where you stand, and this is where you do not." Clara didn't react. She simply adjusted her stance, her eyes lifting toward the stage where the auctioneer was preparing to begin, her breathing even, her presence steady, like someone who understood something the rest of the room had yet to realize. And as the soft murmur of conversation swelled again beneath the glow of chandeliers, no one noticed the way her gaze settled, not on the jewelry, not on the paintings, but on the people themselves, as if she were quietly taking inventory of a room that, in ways none of them could yet comprehend, already belonged to her. The air felt the same. The music continued, glasses clinked, laughter floated. But somewhere beneath it all, something had already shifted, unseen, irreversible, waiting for the moment when silence would fall and the truth would make itself known. The soft chime of a crystal glass being tapped echoed across the ballroom, drawing attention toward the stage where the auctioneer adjusted his cufflinks and smiled with polished confidence, signaling the beginning of the evening's main event. And as conversations quieted into a respectful hush, Clara Whitmore remained near the edge of the room, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, as if the shift in atmosphere had little to do with her, though in truth she was watching everything. With quiet precision, guests began to take their seats at round tables draped in white linen, each place marked with names that carried weight in boardrooms and headlines. And yet Clara's name was nowhere to be found, not on any card, not on any list, a detail that did not escape the attention of the staff coordinating the event. A young assistant approached her with a rehearsed smile that did not quite reach his eyes, his voice polite but firm as he gestured toward a less visible section near the back, suggesting that seating for general attendees was available there, away from the central spotlight reserved for key donors and distinguished guests. Clara nodded slightly, offering no resistance, no explanation, simply following the direction given as if she had expected nothing more, her heels making the faintest sound against the marble floor, each step steady, unhurried, unbothered. Across the room, Evelyn Blackwood observed the exchange with subtle satisfaction, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her champagne glass as she leaned toward a companion, her voice low enough to remain private, yet laced with unmistakable amusement. "They always find their way in somehow," she murmured, her gaze flicking briefly toward Clara's retreating figure. "But they never stay where they do not belong." A soft ripple of laughter followed, contained within her circle, reinforcing the unspoken agreement that the evening was reserved for a certain kind of presence, a certain level of worth that could be measured and verified. Meanwhile, Clara reached the designated table near the back, a place where conversations were quieter, less influential, where names were not announced, and eyes did not linger, and she took her seat without hesitation, folding her hands lightly in her lap as she looked toward the stage, her focus unwavering. The auctioneer began with a warm introduction, speaking about generosity, impact, and the importance of giving back, his voice smooth and practiced, designed to inspire both emotion and competition. And as the first item was presented, a rare piece of art encased in glass, paddles began to rise almost immediately from the front tables. Numbers called out with confidence, each bid higher than the last, each voice carrying the assurance of someone accustomed to winning. Clara did not move. She watched. She listened. She absorbed the rhythm of the room, the cadence of wealth and motion, the subtle signals exchanged between those who knew exactly how to play this game. At Evelyn's table, the energy was different, sharper, more performative, each bid accompanied by a glance, a smirk, a calculated display of dominance that extended beyond the item itself. And when Evelyn raised her paddle, the room seemed to acknowledge it with a slight shift, as if her participation alone elevated the stakes. It was not just about the object, it was about presence, about reminding everyone who held influence here. As the bidding continued, Clara's name remained unspoken, her presence unrecognized, and yet there was something about the stillness she carried, something deliberate in her silence, as if she were waiting for a moment that had not yet arrived. A server passed by again, this time setting a glass of water in front of her without comment, a small gesture that went unnoticed by most, but Clara offered a quiet nod in return, her appreciation genuine, her attention returning to the stage where the next item was being unveiled. And as the numbers climbed higher, voices growing more animated, no one realized that the woman seated in the least important place in the room was the only one who was not trying to prove anything, because she already knew exactly how this night would end, and more importantly, exactly who would be left speechless when it did. The auction moved faster now, the numbers rising with a kind of effortless confidence that only came from people who had never been told no. And as the next item was revealed, a rare diamond necklace resting under soft white light, a quiet murmur of anticipation spread across the room, the kind that signaled not just interest but competition, the kind that drew attention from every corner of the ballroom. Clara Whitmore remained seated, her posture unchanged, her hands resting lightly against the edge of the table, her gaze fixed on the stage as if she were studying something far more intricate than a piece of jewelry, while around her, conversations resumed in hushed tones, punctuated by the occasional glance in her direction, curiosity now mixed with a hint of dismissal. At the front, Evelyn Blackwood leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression calm but calculating, her fingers tapping once against the polished surface of the table before she lifted her paddle with deliberate ease, her voice clear and measured as she placed the opening bid, a number high enough to set the tone, to remind everyone that she was not there to participate but to lead. The room responded accordingly, a few others raising their paddles, their bids climbing steadily but cautiously, each increase met with subtle nods, silent acknowledgments of the invisible hierarchy that governed the evening. Clara did not move. Not yet. She watched the rhythm build, the cadence of voices rising and falling, the pauses between bids growing shorter as the tension tightened, and somewhere within that pattern, she found the moment she had been waiting for. It came quietly, almost unnoticed, when the auctioneer called for the next increment and the room hesitated, just for a second, just long enough for something new to enter the space. From the back of the room, a voice spoke, calm and steady, carrying further than expected without needing to rise. Clara lifted her hand, not dramatically, not with urgency, but with a kind of certainty that did not ask for attention yet commanded it all the same. Heads turned, slowly at first, then all at once, as the realization spread that the new bid had not come from the front, not from the known names, but from the woman no one had been watching. The number she offered was precise, deliberate, and higher than the last by a margin that shifted the air instantly, not outrageous, not reckless, but undeniably confident. The auctioneer paused for half a heartbeat, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her, surprise flickering briefly before professionalism returned, and he repeated the bid clearly, making it official, making it real. A ripple moved through the guests, subtle but unmistakable, whispers threading through the tables as people leaned closer to one another, asking the same question in different words. Who is she? At Evelyn's table, the reaction was slower, more controlled, but no less sharp. Her gaze narrowed slightly, her smile tightening just enough to reveal that something had changed, that the predictable flow of the evening had been interrupted in a way she did not appreciate. She raised her paddle again, her voice smooth, matching the new number with ease, as if to re-establish order, to remind the room that control had not shifted, not yet. Clara listened, her expression unchanged, and when the auctioneer called again, she responded without hesitation, her second bid landing with the same quiet precision, pushing the number higher, drawing the line further. The room grew quieter now, not completely silent, but focused, attentive in a way it had not been before, because something unfamiliar was happening, something that did not fit the script everyone had come to expect. Clara did not look at Evelyn, did not acknowledge the attention gathering around her. She simply watched the stage, as if the outcome had already been decided somewhere beyond this moment. And as the bids climbed, one voice from the front and one from the back, the distance between them no longer just physical but symbolic, the room began to understand that this was no longer about a necklace, and whatever came next would not end the way they had assumed when the night began. The tension in the room tightened with each passing second, the kind that could not be hidden behind polite smiles or practiced elegance, as the auctioneer's voice carried the latest figure into the air and then paused, waiting, watching, sensing that something unusual was unfolding before him. Evelyn Blackwood's posture remained composed, but the subtle shift in her shoulders betrayed a growing irritation, the kind that came not from the amount being bid, but from the disruption of expectation, because this was not how the evening was supposed to go. She glanced briefly toward the back of the room again, this time not with casual curiosity, but with direct focus, her eyes locking onto Clara Whitmore for the first time with intent, as if trying to place her, categorize her, understand how someone so plainly dressed could continue to move so confidently in a space defined by wealth and status. Interesting, Evelyn said softly, her voice measured but edged with something sharper now, as she lifted her paddle once more and raised the bid without hesitation, her tone controlled, almost dismissive, as if to suggest that whatever challenge had appeared would be handled quickly and quietly. A few guests leaned closer, their whispers no longer subtle, their attention fully drawn to the silent exchange between front and back, between known power and unknown presence. Clara did not look away. She remained seated exactly as she had been, her back straight, her expression calm, her eyes steady on the stage, and when the auctioneer called again, she responded with the same quiet certainty, her voice carrying clearly, her number precise, pushing the price higher in a way that no longer felt accidental. The room shifted again, this time more noticeably, as a few paddles lowered, their owners choosing to step back, recognizing that this was no longer a casual bidding war, but something else entirely, something that demanded more than curiosity to sustain. The necklace gleamed under the lights, but no one was truly looking at it anymore. All eyes were on Clara. At Evelyn's table, the smiles had faded, replaced by a more serious focus, and one of her companions leaned in, whispering something that caused a brief flicker of uncertainty to cross Evelyn's face before it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by a tighter, more deliberate expression. She raised her paddle again, her voice slightly firmer now, matching Clara's latest bid with an increase that was no longer about the item but about control, about maintaining a position that had never been questioned before tonight. The auctioneer's voice echoed once more, repeating the number, his tone steady but his eyes betraying a growing awareness that the energy in the room had changed. Clara listened, her breathing even, her posture unchanged, and for a moment, just a brief moment, she allowed her gaze to shift, not toward Evelyn directly, but in her direction, enough to acknowledge the presence without engaging it, a glance that carried no challenge, no arrogance, just a quiet understanding that the moment had arrived. Then she lifted her hand again. This time, the number she spoke did not simply continue the pattern, it broke it, rising higher than expected, not recklessly, but with a confidence that made hesitation impossible, a figure that caused the auctioneer to pause again, longer this time, before repeating it, slower, clearer, ensuring there was no mistake. The room went still, the kind of stillness that settles when something undeniable has just occurred, when the balance has shifted in a way that cannot be ignored. Evelyn did not respond immediately. Her hand remained near her paddle, her fingers still, her expression carefully controlled, but the delay itself was enough to be noticed, enough to signal that something was no longer certain. Around her, the whispers stopped. No one laughed. No one moved. Clara lowered her hand and returned it to the table, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened, as if this was simply the natural progression of an evening she had already anticipated. And in that silence, in that brief, suspended moment where no one spoke and no one dared to break the tension, it became clear to everyone in the room that the woman they had dismissed had just taken control of a space that was never meant for her, and she had done it without raising her voice, without standing up, without asking for permission. The silence did not break all at once. It unraveled slowly, like a thread pulled too tight, as the auctioneer cleared his throat and repeated the final number again, his voice slightly more deliberate now, as if he understood that what he was saying carried more weight than just a price. "Do I have a higher bid?" he asked, scanning the room, his gaze briefly returning to Evelyn Blackwood, who remained still, her hand resting near the paddle but no longer moving, her expression composed but no longer effortless. For the first time that evening, uncertainty lingered in her eyes, not dramatic, not obvious, but present enough to shift the balance of power in a room that had always belonged to her. A few seconds passed, then a few more, each one stretching longer than expected, until the absence of her response became an answer of its own. "Going once," the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing slightly against the high ceilings, drawing every eye back to the stage. Clara Whitmore did not move. She did not glance around to measure reactions or seek validation. She simply sat there, calm and grounded, as if she had been here many times before, as if this moment was not a victory, but an inevitability. "Going twice," the auctioneer continued, and somewhere in the room, someone shifted in their seat, the sound amplified by the stillness that had taken hold. At Evelyn's table, no one spoke. The earlier laughter had vanished completely, replaced by a quiet tension that no one seemed willing to acknowledge out loud. And then, finally, the gavel came down with a clean, decisive sound that echoed through the ballroom. "Sold." The words settled over the room like a final note, unmistakable and irreversible. A ripple moved through the crowd, but it was not applause, not yet. It was something closer to disbelief, a collective realization that something had just happened that did not fit the narrative everyone had assumed when they walked in. Clara lowered her hand fully, resting it again on the table, her expression unchanged, her breathing steady, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. The necklace, now hers, was almost irrelevant, just a symbol of a shift that no one could ignore anymore. The auctioneer offered a polite smile in her direction, though it carried a hint of curiosity now, as if he, too, was beginning to wonder who exactly he had just handed the evening's most coveted item to. Across the room, Evelyn leaned back slowly, her posture still controlled, but the subtle stiffness in her movements revealed what her expression tried to conceal. She lifted her glass, taking a small sip, her eyes no longer on the stage but on Clara, studying her with a new kind of focus, one that was no longer dismissive but searching. "Find out who she is," she said quietly to the person beside her, her voice low but firm, the words carrying an urgency that had not been there before. Around them, the atmosphere shifted again, conversations restarting but now centered on a single question, whispered from table to table, passed between guests who prided themselves on knowing everything that mattered. No one had an answer. Clara, meanwhile, remained exactly where she was, not rising to claim attention, not moving toward the front, not acknowledging the weight of the moment she had just created. A server approached hesitantly, offering congratulations in a careful tone, placing a discreet card on the table for payment processing, and Clara accepted it with a small nod, her fingers brushing lightly over the paper as if it were a routine formality. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She simply existed in the moment with a quiet certainty that contrasted sharply with the growing unease around her. And as the next item was introduced and the auction attempted to continue, something fundamental had already changed, because the room no longer saw her as invisible, but they still did not understand who she was. And that gap between recognition and understanding was where the real shift began to take shape. One that would soon force every person in that ballroom to reconsider everything they thought they knew about power, status, and the quiet woman they had underestimated. The auction resumed, but the rhythm had changed in a way no one could quite ignore, as if the room itself had been quietly recalibrated around a new center of gravity, one that no longer sat at the front beneath the chandeliers, but somewhere near the back where Clara Whitmore remained seated, calm and composed, her presence now impossible to overlook even as she made no effort to draw attention to herself. Conversations restarted, but they carried a different tone now, softer, more cautious. As names were exchanged in low voices, phones discreetly checked beneath tables, and quiet attempts were made to identify the woman who had just outbid one of the most recognized figures in the room without hesitation. At Evelyn Blackwood's table, the shift was more deliberate, more controlled, but no less significant. She set her glass down carefully, her fingers lingering for a brief moment before withdrawing, her gaze still fixed in Clara's direction as if trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly become urgent. "Well?" she asked quietly, her voice smooth but edged with expectation as she glanced toward the man seated beside her, someone accustomed to knowing things before others did. He shook his head slightly, his expression tight, uncomfortable in a way that suggested this was not a situation he was used to navigating. "No record," he replied under his breath, careful not to draw attention, at least not in the usual circles. The answer lingered between them, heavier than it should have been, because in a room like this, not being known was not neutral, it was disruptive. Evelyn's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in frustration, but in calculation, as if she were already adjusting her approach, already preparing for a situation that no longer followed familiar rules. On stage, the auctioneer continued, introducing the next item with practiced enthusiasm, but even his voice carried a subtle awareness that the room's attention was divided, that something beyond the items on display had captured the interest of the crowd. Clara accepted the small card placed before her, her fingers moving with quiet efficiency as she reviewed it, then reached into her bag and produced a sleek, unmarked card of her own, placing it gently on the table without ceremony, as if this were the most routine action in the world. The server who had approached her earlier returned, this time with a slightly different demeanor, more attentive, more careful, as he accepted the card and gave a small nod, his posture reflecting a shift that had already begun to ripple through the staff as well. He walked away quickly, but not hurriedly, carrying with him something more than a transaction, something that would soon move through the unseen channels that connected every part of the event. Clara leaned back slightly in her chair, her gaze returning to the stage, her expression unchanged, as if nothing of importance had occurred, as if she had simply participated in an evening activity and now returned to observing. But across the room, Evelyn watched every movement, every gesture, every detail, her attention no longer casual, no longer dismissive, but focused with a quiet intensity that signaled something deeper. She stood slowly, smoothing the fabric of her gown with a practiced motion, her posture regaining its familiar confidence as she made her way across the room, Not directly, not abruptly, but with the kind of controlled grace that ensured every step appeared intentional, every movement part of a larger design. Conversations paused as she passed, eyes following her path, because when Evelyn Blackwood moved, people noticed. And yet, for the first time that evening, she was not moving toward the stage, not toward recognition or display, but toward the back of the room, toward the woman who had said almost nothing and yet changed everything. Clara did not turn as Evelyn approached. She did not shift in her seat or prepare for the interaction. She simply remained as she was, her presence steady, her silence unbroken, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. And as Evelyn came to a stop just a few feet away, the space between them filled with a quiet tension that needed no words to be understood, a moment suspended just before something would be said that could not be taken back, while the rest of the room watched without appearing to watch, waiting to see how this unexpected confrontation would unfold. Evelyn Blackwood stopped just short of Clara's table, the faint scent of her perfume arriving a moment before her words, a subtle announcement of presence that usually commanded attention without effort. But this time, the effect felt different, as if the space itself was no longer responding in the same way. Clara Whitmore did not look up immediately. She finished the small, deliberate motion of placing her glass back onto the table, aligning it neatly with the edge, before finally lifting her gaze, calm and unhurried, meeting Evelyn's eyes with a steadiness that carried no trace of apology, no sign of discomfort, only quiet awareness. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. The room seemed to lean in, conversations fading into the background, replaced by a silence that felt intentional, as if everyone present understood that something important was about to be revealed, even if they did not yet know what. Evelyn offered a smile, polished and precise, the kind she had perfected over years of navigating rooms like this, a smile that could welcome or dismiss depending on the moment. "I do not believe we have met," she said, her voice smooth, controlled, each word measured carefully, as if testing the ground before stepping further. Clara inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, but nothing more. "Clara Whitmore," she replied, her tone even, neither warm nor cold, simply factual, as if stating her name carried no expectation of recognition. Evelyn repeated it softly, as though committing it to memory, her eyes narrowing just enough to suggest that the name meant something, or at least that it should. "Whitmore," she echoed, then paused, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to make the moment feel deliberate. "And yet, I cannot seem to place you." The words were polite, but the implication beneath them was unmistakable, a subtle assertion that in a room like this, being unknown was an anomaly that required explanation. Clara did not react to the implication. She simply held Evelyn's gaze, her expression unchanged, her posture relaxed, as if the need to be recognized was not something she shared. "That is not surprising," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard without drawing attention. "I do not usually attend events like this." A few nearby guests exchanged glances, their curiosity sharpening, because the answer did not clarify anything, it only deepened the mystery. Evelyn's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, her composure intact, but her interest now fully engaged. "And yet," she continued, her tone shifting slightly, more direct now, "you seem quite comfortable participating at this level." There was a faint emphasis on the last words, a reminder of the bid, of the moment that had disrupted the evening's balance. Clara allowed a small pause before responding, not out of hesitation, but precision, as if choosing exactly how much to reveal. "Comfort does not come from the room," she said softly. "It comes from knowing why you are in it." The statement hung in the air, simple on the surface, but layered with meaning that was not immediately clear, and for the first time, Evelyn did not respond right away. She studied Clara more closely now, not her clothes or her posture, but something deeper, something that did not fit into the categories she was used to applying. Behind her, movement caught her attention, a subtle shift among the staff, a man in a tailored suit approaching with quiet urgency, his steps measured but purposeful, his focus fixed not on Evelyn, but on Clara. He slowed as he reached the table, offering a respectful nod that was noticeably different from the casual politeness shown earlier in the evening. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his voice low but clear. "We have completed the verification." The words were simple, but the tone carried weight, enough to draw the attention of those closest, enough to cause Evelyn's expression to still for just a fraction of a second. Clara turned slightly toward him, her movement calm, unsurprised, as if this was exactly what she had been expecting. "Thank you," she replied, just as quietly. The man nodded again, then added, "The board has been notified. They are preparing to speak with you at your convenience." A silence followed, deeper than before, heavier, because something had just been introduced into the room that no one could yet fully understand, but everyone could feel. Evelyn's gaze shifted between the man and Clara, her mind moving quickly now, connecting details, re-evaluating assumptions, the pieces beginning to form a picture she had not anticipated. Clara turned back to her, her expression still composed, still steady, but now there was something else beneath it, something that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. And in that moment, without raising her voice, without changing her tone, the balance between them shifted completely, leaving no doubt that whatever this evening was supposed to be, it was no longer under Evelyn's control. The air in the ballroom seemed to shift in a way that could not be undone, as if an invisible line had been crossed, and everyone present felt it at the same time, even if no one spoke it aloud. Evelyn Blackwood held her posture, her composure still intact, but the silence that followed the man's words no longer belonged to her. It belonged to Clara Whitmore, who had not raised her voice, had not demanded attention, yet now stood at the center of it without effort. "The board," Evelyn repeated softly, her tone controlled but no longer dismissive, the question hanging between curiosity and caution, as if she were stepping into unfamiliar territory one word at a time. Clara regarded her calmly, her expression unchanged, her presence grounded in a way that made the tension around them feel almost distant. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady, "the board." The simplicity of the answer did not clarify anything, but it carried a weight that could not be ignored. Around them, guests who had pretended not to listen were now fully attentive, their conversations paused mid-sentence, their focus drawn to the exchange with quiet intensity. The man in the tailored suit remained beside Clara, his posture respectful, his presence reinforcing something that no one had yet fully understood, but everyone could now sense. Evelyn's gaze sharpened, her mind moving quickly, assembling fragments, recalling names, foundations, ownership structures, all the invisible networks that define power in rooms like this. And then something shifted, something clicked, subtle but unmistakable. "Whitmore," she said again, this time differently, not as a question, but as recognition beginning to take shape. Clara did not confirm it, did not expand. She simply held the moment, allowing the realization to arrive on its own terms. A faint ripple passed through the room as others began to follow the same thread, whispers forming, names being connected, the kind of quiet discovery that spreads faster than any announcement. Evelyn's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough, the confidence still there, but now accompanied by something else, something closer to awareness, perhaps even restraint. "You are connected to the Whitmore Trust," she said finally, her voice lower now, more careful, as if each word mattered more than before. Clara inclined her head slightly, not in agreement, not in denial, simply acknowledging the direction of the thought. "I am the Whitmore Trust," she said quietly. The words did not rise, they did not demand attention, but they carried across the space with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. The effect was immediate. The room did not erupt, it did not react loudly. Instead, it fell into a deeper silence, the kind that comes when something undeniable has just been revealed, something that redefines everything that came before it. Evelyn stood still, her breath measured, her gaze fixed on Clara, and for the first time that evening, there was no attempt to control the moment, no effort to shape it, because it was already beyond her reach. The Whitmore Trust was not just a name. It was influence, infrastructure, funding, the unseen force behind initiatives, investments, and foundations that many in this very room depended on, directly or indirectly, and the realization of who Clara truly was settled over the guests like a quiet reckoning. The man beside Clara stepped back slightly, his role complete, his presence no longer needed to validate what had just been said. Clara remained seated, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, as if nothing had shifted for her at all, as if this had always been the truth, simply unspoken until now. Evelyn exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just enough to signal acceptance, not defeat, but understanding, a recalibration of perspective that could not be avoided. And in that moment, without any grand declaration, without any raised voice, the hierarchy of the room rearranged itself completely, leaving no doubt that the woman they had overlooked was not just part of the world they valued. She was one of the forces that shaped it, and she had revealed it only when it mattered most. No one moved for a moment, not because they were unsure what to do, but because they understood that anything they did next would carry meaning, and in a room built on perception, meaning was everything. Evelyn Blackwood stood facing Clara Whitmore, her posture still elegant, her expression composed, but the dynamic between them had shifted in a way that no amount of refinement could disguise. The distance that once separated status from obscurity had collapsed entirely, replaced by a quiet clarity that settled over the room like a final verdict. Evelyn gave a small, controlled nod, the kind that acknowledged reality without surrendering dignity, her voice softer now, measured in a way that reflected not weakness, but recognition. Then it seems, she said carefully, we have all underestimated the evening. Clara met her gaze, her expression steady, her presence unchanged, as if nothing about her had transformed, only the room's understanding of her. The evening reveals what it needs to, she replied, her tone calm, neither sharp nor indulgent, simply true. Around them, the guests began to shift, not dramatically, but enough to signal that the silence had reached its natural end. Conversations resumed, but they were no longer the same, voices lower, more thoughtful, as if each person was reconsidering not just what had happened, but how they had contributed to it. A few approached cautiously, offering polite greetings, their curiosity now tempered with respect, their earlier assumptions quietly set aside. Clara acknowledged them with small nods, never overextending, never claiming more space than necessary, her composure consistent, her presence grounded in something deeper than the room itself. The auction continued, but its importance had diminished, the items now secondary to the realization that had already taken place. Evelyn stepped back slightly, creating space, her mind clearly recalibrating, her role no longer centered on control, but on adaptation. She glanced once more at Clara, not with dismissal, not with challenge, but with a measured respect that had not existed before. I hope, Evelyn said after a brief pause, her voice quiet but sincere, that the rest of your evening is more appropriately received. Clara allowed the faintest hint of a smile, not triumphant, not dismissive, but knowing, as if she understood the weight behind the words. Reception was never the purpose, she replied gently, but understanding often arrives late. The statement lingered, not as a correction, but as a reflection, one that carried beyond Evelyn, beyond the table, into the room itself. The chandeliers above continued to glow, the marble floors still echoed with movement, but something fundamental had changed, something that would remain long after the night ended. Guests would leave with stories, with impressions, with quiet realizations they might not fully articulate, but would remember nonetheless. Clara rose from her seat with the same quiet grace she had carried all evening, her movements unhurried, her presence leaving no trace of urgency, as if she had simply completed what she came to do. She did not seek acknowledgement, did not wait for applause. She simply moved through the space, past the same tables, past the same faces that had once overlooked her, now watching with a different understanding. And as she reached the exit, the doors opening softly before her, the room behind her settled into a reflective silence once more, not forced, not commanded, but earned. Because in the end, nothing about Clara Whitmore had changed that night. Only the way the world chose to see her had shifted, and that difference was enough to remind everyone present that true power does not announce itself. It reveals itself only when necessary, and when it does not need to be loud to be undeniable.